Today is National Day of Reflection. Survivors of abuse in state and faith-based care today are marking the day with more than 60 events around the country. This is, of course, the Royal Commission of Inquiry into the Abuse of State Care. And a year on from the government's apology, many survivors feel that the actions of the government are in contradiction to its promises for change. Survivor and advocate Ken Clearwater is going to be joining me a little later on in the show. Where we are going to start, though, is police are poised, mentioned this yesterday briefly, to begin testing drivers for drugs with a device that involves a quick swipe of the tongue. The oral fluid testing device will be able to detect, well, they're searching for 4 at this stage: cannabis, cocaine, ecstasy and meth. The announcement yesterday of the roadside testing for 4 types of drugs kicks off next month in Wellington. And then it spreads nationwide by mid-2026. If the tongue swipe test, which takes only a few minutes, comes back positive, a second roadside test will then follow. If that is positive as well, then the driver will be prohibited from driving for 12 months. And then the test goes off to the lab, where I believe they test for another 25 drugs. In addition, after that, any infringement notice will follow. Drug Detection Agency Chief Executive Glenn Dobson says data shows that 30% of all road deaths are now involving people that are impaired by drugs. And he joins me now. Glenn, good afternoon.
Yeah, hi, Leah.
Hey, thanks for being available, Glenn. Before we jump into the drug driving testing, I mean, it's in the name. You are a drug detection agency. But where is your focus? What do you do? Is it workplaces?
Yeah,
companies?
so predominantly we're in workplaces and companies, and for a couple of reasons. Often we work in industries that are described as safety sensitive, so we want to make sure people are not affected by drugs in workplaces where it could cause accidents or death in the workplace. And we often work with family courts as well. If there's disputes around child custody and so forth, and there's fears of dangers for the caregivers or the parents and the influence of drugs, we'll help them out by doing drug testing in that environment as well.
Are you busy, Glenn? How's it going?
Yeah, look, I was actually speaking to somebody just last night about this. There's an increased awareness around drugs and so on, but there's still plenty of drugs in the community. I think over the last several years, there's been a softened stance around the acceptance of drugs, and also we've seen a massive influence of the 501s and the more, sophisticated and organised gangs being able to get more drugs into New Zealand.
Yeah, well, the government's calling it a cartel now, isn't it? No, we are being targeted.
Yeah, and we're paying top dollar, and so we're an attractive market for them.
Yeah. And just quickly on that, meth is a real problem. Wastewater testing indicates a doubling of meth consumption from 732 kgs in 2023 to 1,434 kgs last year. I mean, Glenn, do you really think we're going to ever get on top of this?
Look, yeah, that's the $64,000 question, isn't it, in relation to how we go about it? The government just released some news earlier this week, late last week, in relation to their response to the meth problem, and they're obviously putting a lot of emphasis and effort both into the enforcement side of it, but also into the education and the rehabilitation side of it as well, which I think is a really positive thing. It's a complex issue, drugs in society and the challenges that drugs create is a really complex issue. And the challenge for any government and any regulator is it's not a one size fits all in relation to a response. And it needs a multi-layered response, and potentially the government taking an education/rehabilitation/enforcement response is a strong step forward in relation to that, I think.
All right, let's look at the roadside drug testing that's going to start next month in Wellington and then spread out across the country. The device that the police are going to start using, it's you just quickly swipe the tongue. I suppose everyone wants to know this device, Glenn. Would you be familiar with what they're going to be using? Is it legit? Is it accurate?
Yeah, look, my understanding is that it is a same or similar device that's being used in the jurisdictions across Australia at the moment, quite successfully for their roadside drug testing.
Mm.
Also, need to be aware that the devices, the oral fluid devices, are verified. So they're verified by a lab, an independent lab, to show that they work according to the manufacturer's specifications. So they need to reach a certain threshold around accuracy and specificity and so forth around the drugs they're looking for. Need to be really clear though, it is a screen, and with drug testing, like a lot of things, if you want something fast, you do have to give up a little bit around accuracy.
Yes.
And so speed is one thing around the roadside that the police, I think, rightly want to try and make it as quick as convenient as possible. They obviously don't want to detain people for too long. But the good thing about this legislation also is before any prosecution can happen, a blood sample needs to go to a lab. And the lab tests that blood sample in what's basically known as a confirmatory test. And lab testing really is the gold standard. So that is where it's very accurate in relation to that.
Right. Because, I mean, I'm expecting there will be pushback, Glenn, people that will query it, its efficacy. Not everyone's just going to accept it straight away, I could imagine.
Yeah, I expect that as well. And to be honest, there's probably nothing wrong with that. There'll be no surprise. This is, I guess, the second iteration of the legislation. The previous government tried to bring in this legislation, but made the legislation far too difficult for any oral fluid device to be able to tick the boxes to qualify to be used as a roadside drug testing device. But I think where the government has landed with this particular legislation, it's a very good, strong, safe middle ground around protecting the safety of people out on the roads, protecting the people that are using vehicles on the roads correctly from potentially drug-affected drivers, and also protecting the rights of everybody as well.
Glenn, you said that, they've got to be fast, they can't hold up traffic while they test someone for 30 minutes. So I get that. And then if they do 2 positives and then it goes to the lab, and then that's where, they really will know. But with alcohol, they've set the limits to know that we are impaired, because drugs can be detected in the body long after the effects have worn off. I've always scratched my head about, how do we know that a positive will show that the person is actually impaired while driving?
Yeah, and that's often a challenging question. It's often a question that we get asked from a workplace drug testing perspective as well. So when we talk about it in the workplace, we don't talk about the fact of whether it's impairment or not. We talk about the risk of impairment. So the drug testing devices themselves have a cutoff. So it doesn't pick up mere presence. It doesn't pick up the fact that the drug is specifically there or not at any level. The drug has to be there above a certain level for it to be indicate that the drug is actually there. If you compare that with we're all really familiar with the roadside breath testing at the moment for alcohol. The first step is always the police officer will put the electronic device in front of the driver, and they'll ask to count to 10 or state their name and address, and that'll pick up passive breath and will indicate whether alcohol is present or not. And if it is, then they'll go and blow into the machine, and that will give you a reading. And the reading, if you're above it, then you'll be prosecuted. If you're below it, you're allowed to continue on, type thing. That's a cut-off as well. And so that's the devices for oral fluid drug testing work in a different science, but they work with a cut-off for the drugs as well.
Okay. So you were a police officer in a previous life, weren't you? So am I right?
Yes.
Yeah. And am I correct in saying that you worked in, like the drug side of it, so you'd know the harm of what drugs can do?
Yeah. So I was a police officer for 15 years, spent the vast majority on the streets. So certainly saw a lot of negative effects of drugs. And also spent another part of my working life with the coroner's office. So I saw a lot of the negative effects around deaths and drugs and the associated risks around that as well.
Roadside testing, drug testing is common across all states and territories in Australia, UK, Germany, Italy, France. Why do you think it's taken us so long to get here?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question.
Mm,
And look, I don't know if I'm qualified to answer it completely. Look, I think it is a bit of a political football at times, and there are some
mm,
challenges around getting the legislation right. And as I said before, I think there's some challenges rightly around getting that balance between protecting people's rights around freedom of movement and
yeah,
also protecting the safety on the road and so forth. And so I think the successive governments have taken a fairly measured approach to it, and that's why I think it's taken a while. Um, where I'm, I guess, confident or where I'm buoyed or where I feel comfortable around the current legislation is whilst it's not exactly the same, it's very similar to some of the successful legislation that's been applied in the states across Australia.
yeah,
And I again, I'm very comfortable with where that sits. I'm a road user. I'm a family man that's got kids and so on, and I want
yeah,
to make sure that my family and my friends and my relatives and my children are safe on the road from people that are potentially affected by drugs.
yeah. On that, you just mentioned, and I mentioned Australia as well. Someone has said, could you ask Glenn about Victoria scrapping cannabis testing? Is that right? I don't know. Do you know?
Victoria, my understanding is at the moment Victoria are looking at cannabis testing in workplaces and also some roadside drug testing for cannabis around medicinal cannabis.
Ah, okay.
Because Victoria and Australia has some slightly different legislation around medicinal cannabis than New Zealand does, and so they're doing some studies on that at the moment. I think it might be at the Monash University in Victoria.
Mm,
Um, on the flip side, Australia is actually having some real challenges around their medicinal cannabis regime and some of the dispensaries and some of the doctors not following the correct processes around that. So that's a separate discussion, I guess.
yeah. Is this, I mean, there's no silver bullet, Glenn, to anything, but I suppose, it's been a long time coming. And will this be a game changer if we've got 30% of all road deaths now involving an impaired drug driver? One would hope we will start to see a change, but what do you think?
Yeah, like I agree with you. This is not a silver bullet, but gee, it's a really, really good step in the right direction. Um, this will take time. It's new legislation, and it's something that's new to the driving public. I
Mm,
like the fact that the government has also talked about some education around this as well. I think that's vital. Again, I don't think you can just take a one stance approach. It's got to be a
mm,
multi-layered approach, and so the education going with this is a really good thing. But ultimately, I think it is a very, very good step in the right direction. Certainly draws a line in the sand in relation to the fact that the government and hopefully the rest of society says we value our safety on the roads. Being on the roads, it can be a dangerous place to be.
oh,
We don't
yeah.
want to increase that danger because of drugs, and we want people to get home safely at the end of the day.
I mentioned meth, of course, in the scourge of it on society and how we are now becoming huge meth users. What's the next one of concern, Glenn? Because I've spoken with Sarah Helm from the Drug Foundation quite a bit, and she's now they've got their eye on fentanyl, which is a
Hmm.
big problem overseas. Is that something you have come across in New Zealand? Or we haven't got into that yet? Are you concerned about it?
Yep. I'd go one step further, and I'd put it in the class of synthetic opioids as the real issue, of which fentanyl is within that class.
Right.
Um, Absolutely, it's a huge problem globally. We've seen a massive increase in the states around overdose deaths from fentanyl. Prior to fentanyl, it was oxycodone, which is also a synthetic opioid, and the states has a different environment and regime around drug use and prescription of drugs and so forth. So we're not going to follow them exactly,
Mm.
but globally, the increased production of synthetic opioids is a real concern because, again, the cartels, the drug syndicates, it's easier for them to make those synthetic drugs in the lab than what it is to grow your organic type drugs like your traditional cannabis and so forth.
Mm.
Um, you need a lot less, so it's much easier to smuggle across borders because it's a smaller quantity. It's much more addictive, so you get a
Ugh.
captive market in the users, and the profit margins are huge. So,
Wow.
at the Drug Detection Agency, earlier this year, we actually added fentanyl and tramadol to our standard drug screening
Oh.
tests because we are that concerned about it.
And I hope you don't mind me throwing these questions at you, Glenn, from my learned listeners. But
No.
Chris has said, hi, Leah, asking for a friend, smiley face. What if you have been using cannabis for a long time? Would it not always give you a false positive if the user has a high tolerance due to the long-term buildup of THC in your body fats?
Yeah, and that's a question that comes up quite a bit. THC can stay in the system longer than a lot of other drugs. There is no black and white in relation to how long a drug stays in the system. There's all sorts of various aspects in relation to the person's metabolism, the rate that they metabolize certain things, their gender, their weight, what sort of day they've had, and so forth, etc., etc. But cannabis can stay in the system longer because it binds to the fatty deposits in the body. For cannabis to stay for a very long time in the body, you need to, and studies show this, you need to be a chronic user of cannabis. And they describe a chronic user as using cannabis every day, several times a day for a very long period. So a very heavy smoker of cannabis and so on.
Yeah.
If you're a casual smoker, if you're a casual user, like a Friday, Saturday night party, generally most drugs, including cannabis, will pass through your system in roughly 48 to 72 hours. For oral fluid testing, even shorter, because oral fluid has what we describe as a shorter window of detection.
Okay. Well, I hope that answered your question, Chris, that you were asking for a friend. Nod, nod, wink, wink. And Glenn, look, look, I'm going to throw this at you, and you can say, "Well, Leah, I don't really want to. This is not why you rang me." But knowing that you are, a former police officer, what's unfolded in the last 24 hours, with what's happened with our top cops. What's your thoughts on that? I mean, you would still have, I could imagine, friends in the force.
Yes, I do. Yeah, I do, and I'm probably the same as most people out there in the public there that it concerns me what's come out. I think Richard Chambers has summarised it pretty well in relation to his. I don't think I'm quoting him here, but his disgust or his dismay in relation to it all, and the fact that it shows a real lack of leadership from certain people at the very top. So it was really concerning.
Yeah, it is. Glenn, I do appreciate your time and for answering some questions as well. Glenn Dobson there, CEO of the Drug Detection Agency.